And there's a huge mistake that some Excel users make, and that's doing rounding off of the ribbon by showing fewer decimals. Now here's a real simple example. And if you were to try what I'm about to try, you'd say, is he crazy? These numbers here, and with a total, we're adding up the numbers. So no higher math here at all, nothing unusual about that. You might say, well, that would look better if they were all displayed in the same layout style. So on the Home tab, in the number group, common choice here could be, if they're dollar signs, you probably don't want dollar signs on every one, but it certainly wouldn't be wrong to use that. And this automatically gives us 2 decimal places, and that's a reasonable display. If you didn't want the dollar sign, why not the comma? Someone said, I don't want all that complication, don't show the decimals. Okay, you might try that. But you probably wouldn't leave it looking like this. It looks like 5 5s equals 23. Now what's going on here? Well, the total truly is accurate. However, it's certainly not accurate based on the values that are showing. And is that really a 5? You can look in the formula bar and see that it's a 4.6. So I can't imagine anybody keeping the format looking like this. But to say that we are throwing away the decimals, and that's the way some people think of this, is just dead wrong. And so what you need to do in a situation like this would be simply display those decimals if you want any kind of coherence in the worksheet. Now this plays out in different ways with formulas. Here's a formula here that's calculating a new price for this item. And we're not looking at any sophistication here necessarily. You can see the formula looks like this. And it's all prepared to be copied down the column. But just a simple little issue might come up. Maybe this is the price of some office supply or something. Maybe it's a stapler or box of rubber bands, and some international company orders 10,000 of these. So just a simple little formula here, equal 10,000 times this amount. Well, I can do the math in your head, right? That's going to be 90,000. And you hit enter. Well, it's not 90,000. And it's not that much short percentage-wise. What is that? It's $41.68. But that money has to be accounted for somewhere. It has to go somewhere or not go somewhere. And that's a concern. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, let's jump back to the data here. This could have been displayed with more decimals. Often you wouldn't do that. But if we increase the decimals here with this button here in the number group on the Home tab, we see that the real answer is this. Now, as I do this, the calculation to the right is not changing in any way, and you can see that. So no matter how many decimals I'm showing here, we are not seeing any difference in the calculation. So this is not changing the value at all. It's simply changing the display. And I couldn't think of any better way to show you how that's, when you see it, it sure is obvious. And yet, some people will make that mistake of saying, well, let's just round this off. Well, it's visual rounding. And in situations like this, imagine how this might get multiplied across other price items here. So what do we need to do here to make this coherent? We need to round this at the formula level. At the round function is the one most people are more likely to use. We embed the formula within that, and then we round it based on decimals. Now, if we want this to go to the nearest penny, and that would be $9, we put in two decimal places. And as soon as I hit enter here, watch the value in F2 change. Because we're changing this now to be exactly, in this example, $9. And the answer changes immediately. And this truly is 9.00. And then we can show more decimals, not to change this, but certainly to change the display of it, to see the real value, and there it is. That's the real value. So we have altered the value by using the round function. Now, if you had some scheme in mind that says, well, all of our prices end in 9, you might play games with this. By putting in 1 here, you're actually rounding it to the nearest 10 cents, and then you could subtract a penny minus 0.01, if that's important to you. So that's $8.99. Other examples here, and we don't know what these are likely to be, but in this situation here, we'll drag it down a few. These are all going to end in 9 if that's your pricing scheme, and that goes with this. Of course, the exact percentage of increase isn't really 4.36 anymore. But sometimes that's a pricing scheme or a pricing mechanism. Now, at other times, what you want to do, we'll do a couple of undos here, to not round to the nearest value. This ends in 9 cents. Sometimes what you want to do with the situation here is to round in a different direction. The round function uses standard techniques. As soon as we reach, in this case, a half cent, it goes upward to the next penny. But sometimes you want to force it upward no matter what. And before doing this, what I want to do is make a copy of a few of these here just to see what it is using a typical round. And I want to see how this might be changing. The two companion functions to this, that override traditional rounding techniques, would be round up. Now that probably won't change this one. It might change the next one. Didn't. It did change this one. And again, we're talking pennies here, but with similar situations using different rounding capabilities, this has some potential long-term impact. If we go back for a second here, I'll do an undo and recopy this calculation here. We're talking about 43,400. This is a roundup. Make the next one be a roundup. Well, that's a $500 difference based on this scheme. And of course, you would expect the other variation on this is to use a round down. And the easiest thing to remember here is this is what we do with our ages. So if you're 39 years and 11 months, you're 39, and we round down to the previous year. In this case, that would be an $8.99. And again, not necessarily remembering what all these had been, but here and there, these will drop depending upon what it might have been earlier compared with rounding up. So round up, round down have their roles to play. And if you use 0, by the way, instead of 2, that means round to the nearest whole dollar. And that might be a more appropriate thing to do here with salaries. In some organizations, yearly salaries. And here we're simply showing a calculation where an existing salary is being upgraded. All these salaries are about to be changed by 4.43%. If this organization decides not to carry pennies in its salary calculations, probably what they would do here is to use round, but in this case, round 0, if they want to round it to the nearest dollar. So 0 is the number of decimal places, comma 0. And we see all these would end that way. And you probably wouldn't be displaying the pennies, but you certainly could. And here too, a round up, round down might make sense. But here's another angle too that you might not have thought of. And I have seen this in some organizations, just for ease of use and manipulation, all salaries are to the end in a multiple of 100. So in adjusting these salaries, maybe we'll just change into the nearest 100, and that would be -2, 2 places to the left of the decimal. And so dragging down, where's that one going to go? That's going to go down to 500, 69,500. Next one up to, 80,100, and so on. And here too, you could imagine the implications of round up and round down. If we use round up, potentially some of these could be different than a simple entry by going up as much as $99.99 if we use round up. And of course, there's round down too. Now, another variation on these, and it's a 3-whole set of functions, is sometimes you need to round to values that aren't necessarily decimally based. For example, a pricing scheme here might say, let's just round these and then go to the nearest nickel, the nearest 5 cents. In a certain description of that, you might say, wasn't that a multiple of decimals? Well, possibly, but let's just make this simpler. Instead of using a round or a round down, what if we use mRound? This works a little bit differently. We want to take this calculation here and round it to the nearest 0.05, the nearest nickel. In this case, it's probably going to be $9 again. But in other examples below this here, that's probably going to go up to 35, and you can sort of predict based on what the entries might have been previously, up or down to the nearest 5 cents. We can see that here. And its corresponding companions to round up and round down are not, as you might expect, mRound up or mRound down, but if you want to go upward, how about this? Ceiling. That's going to go up to the next penny. So on some of these are going to change a bit. They haven't yet, but that one went from 10 to 15. And sure enough, if you know ceiling, you know its opposite. If we want to do the equivalent of a round down when it's not decimally based, here it's going to be floor. Same idea. 2 other functions of note, int. You may have seen int. This simply ignores everything to the right of the decimal. I doubt if we'd be using it in the examples here. Possibly we could have used it with salaries. We might want to take this calculation. Int means integer. And we're not talking about the nearest. We're simply going to ignore. In this case, we ignore everything to the right of the decimal. And who knows whether this is going up and down, we need a previous reference, but int simply, and that could have been the choice here, it simply drops the pennies. Just drops them, that's it. And a similar function called trunc, short for truncated, works exactly the same unless you've got negative data. And the details there are not worth talking about now, but if you ever have to strip off decimally based data, usually it's going to be int, but if you got negatives, possibly int or trunc. And one other obscure one, I just want to throw it in here. I doubt if you're going to use this. Would you ever have a set of entries and you want to change them by rounding them up to the next odd number or the next even number? So here's some values here. I'll just do these all at once. One of them's odd already, but suppose you want to take these to the nearest odd number. And I think I used this once. Not that I'm the judge of how often you'll use it, but nevertheless, we see here what's happening. This takes us up to the next odd number. And similarly, there's a function called even that does the same kind of thing. We'll just use it here real fast. Equal even. This will take us up to the next even number in all these cases here. So lots of functions for doing rounding. Key idea of the round function, I think for most people, is going to be 90% of what you do if you need this kind of feature. But just don't make that mistake of adjusting information with these buttons and think that you're really rounding, because you're not.